Hello and welcome back to the channel, and thank you for joining me in another of my little morning ditties, my monologues. And it's very nice of you to join me. I want to say a big thank you to everybody who supports the channel and has subscribed and shares the videos and all those sort of things. Those that have bought my book, Biggleswick, The Town That Wouldn't Comply, it's very kind of you. They're still going out. And please excuse today the setting of this. I'm just filming. I've got to go out, so I wanted to get the video done. And there's just a number of things I've got to do this morning, so I'm a little bit hasty. So I'm just filming in available light in my front room. Anyway, so I want to talk about the question I'm asking today is: Are we dying too young? Now, I'm not talking about sudden deaths from a certain medical intervention that may well have been injected to a number of people, or adverse reactions to various things. I'm asking, are we actually dying too young? Have we been programmed to think that we only live a certain amount of time and then we drop off? I was talking to a friend of mine the other day who reminded me that in the Bible, it does say that people would live to 300, 350 years of age. And it does make you wonder why, a book like that would suggest that, and it would sound preposterous in our day and age that people could possibly live that sort of length of time. And yet you do wonder whether, and this was a point he made to me, and I started to think about this very seriously over the weekend, is have we been, let's say, what would be the word? Have we been taught? Have we been taught to believe that we all live a certain expanse of life? Anything, in the old days it used to be 70 years and 10, and then that was it. You were pretty old and pretty useless. Now we think that it's double that, about 80 odd is the sort of average lifespan. And we're kind of told that this is a fact, isn't it? And of course these facts work themselves into our lives, and our expectation is that we grow old. We get to about 65, 68, whatever the retirement age these days is. And that's it. We're supposed to then sort of slowly get aged, old gracefully, and then at some point pop our clogs. And as a result, that seems to be what happens. But what if our expectation was that we were to live for 300 years and we were taught that actually our lifespan was far longer? Would that actually affect us? Because I'm beginning to wonder whether we have in fact been brainwashed in this world that we live in to expect to only live a certain amount of time. And one of the reasons I say that is when you get to a certain age, and I'm of a certain age, we're all of certain ages, aren't we? But when you get into your 60s, let's say, or there's a certain sense of maturity comes in, you start to perhaps have a different take on life that you did perhaps when you were in your 20s and 30s, and even when you were in your 40s. You start to think, actually, there's a maturity that comes in, and you start perhaps thinking, well, I was running around like a headless chicken trying to set up a family, trying to pay off mortgages, trying to do all these different things and survive. And as you get a bit older, you want to slow down and take it easy. And I remember when my dad died, I thought my dad had lived for 84 years. And I thought it was a shame that he'd reached a point. Admittedly, he had dementia, and so what I'm now going to say isn't really applicable to him. But up until he got dementia, he had seen and witnessed a number of things in the world. He had cogitated, meditated, and thought about things in great detail. He had a certain wisdom of life and what it meant to be alive. He'd had relationships. He had businesses. He had done things with his life, and he had travelled. And that wisdom, I suppose, had gathered to a point where suddenly in his case, he got dementia, and of course, forgot all those things, and then shortly died, sadly. But other people who have gained this wisdom and knowledge over the years, they get to a certain age in their, let's say, in their 70s and 80s, and then they die. And you think, what was that all about? You haven't really had a chance to put that wisdom to any great use. And it made me think that if it was possible to live to a much greater age, a couple of 100 years maybe, then perhaps when you're in your 60s to 80s, you're actually entering, or rather exiting, a sort of teenage year, if you like. I mean, we have our teenage years, of course, and we go through things and we think that everything's very urgent and we have very materialistic thoughts and we try to do a number of things. But it seems to me that actually when you reach a certain age, as I say, in the between 60s and 80s and that sort of thing, you have a maturity and a bit greater understanding of what life is about. And it's at that point you feel like, yes, I'm ready for life. I'm ready now to really go forward and experience my true self, my higher self, my spiritual self. I'm aware of the ego and how that is a separate thing that is making me do various things. You come to a point where you really understand what's important in life. It seems to me, the sunrise. I mean, classic and cliche perhaps example, but the sunrise, the warmth of the sun, the breathing, looking at nature, the development of trees and all those sort of things. You start to realize actually what is important, and that this material world that we've grown up with is perhaps just really a bit like a little child playing with plastic toys. It's as if it's not really that important that we upgrade our smartphones. It's not that important that we spend hours watching television or listening to narratives which have really got nothing to do with us, and why are we stressed and worried about them? You get to a point in life where you start to realize what is really important, what is really true, and the nature of life. And then in this existence as it's been going, is we get old, decrepit and die. But what if that isn't the situation that happens? That if we're expecting, our life expectancy is short, if that's what we're anticipating, perhaps the subconscious mind, perhaps the body is aiming for that, and that we're actually curtailing our lives ourselves much shorter than they need to be. If we had the expectation that we're supposed to live for 200 to 300 years, that would be, would the body at that stage start to sort of go, oh yes, I'm not in any great rush to grow old and become decrepit. Of course, we're not helped in this situation that we live at the moment, in which we live in huge amounts of corruption. We live under a system that is gearing us towards dying at those sort of age by telling us that that's the time that we retire and that we're supposed to get old. It doesn't help us that we're living in a world that is full of toxins and poisons and things. The water is polluted, they're spraying the skies. The processed food that we eat is not real food. We don't know the provenance of the food unless we actually grow it ourselves. The soil has been depleted of vitamins and minerals, and we've forgotten how to cook properly. We've forgotten how to look after ourselves. We've forgotten the important elements, and just as we're beginning to realize all of this, we find ourselves knurled up, decrepit, old, frail, lacking in energy as a result of living perhaps those earlier lives, the stress and the working 9 to 5 and chasing goals, which at the end of the day don't seem to really matter. And the things that really do matter, we've only just discovered them. And I just wonder whether that's that we've been duped, to think that we should only be living a short span. Otherwise, it does seem, what's it all about? Why are we here? What is our purpose? Surely this short window that we have is just too short, and that actually if a certain amount of wisdom comes between the ages of 60 and 80 of what life is, and to me it seems like this is the starting point. The lovely Julia and I are just, as you know, taking on a piece of land, and we're going into a new adventure, and I'm in my 60s, and people are saying to me, but you're too old to do that. You shouldn't be doing it. You should be, sitting in front of the television drinking your cocoa. And I think to myself, well, you're raving mad. Why would you want to curtail life when I have energy and wisdom and knowledge about life? I'm ready to carry on for another 100 years. And of course, if you were able to carry on for another 50 to 100 years, perhaps that wisdom would develop a lot more. Perhaps the slowing down that we feel as you get older, perhaps the cogitation, the meditation, the ability to separate the ego from your true self, the spiritual connection, perhaps that is where you find what life is really about, but that we are all dying a bit too young to actually make that real connection. And it's only a few people who've perhaps thought about these things earlier in life have made that true connection and are trying to teach or educate or explain and share their ideas. Some of the, perhaps what we might call the great gurus of history, perhaps were doing that because they were truly inspired. And it just seems to me that we're so distracted with the immediate so-called necessities of life that actually are probably not important, that you get to a certain point where you think, actually, this is the end of my adolescence, the end of the material looking for things and the sense of I must have this, or the end of the ego, in which you realize, yeah, just like a child grows up, I feel that we end it too early, and that a greater life and a greater wisdom and a greater enjoyment of life is just around the corner, and yet we die. Now, whether this has been manipulated, whether this has been by those people at the top who seem to sort of perhaps understand these things and keep these secrets secret and have developed a system, this fake corrupt system with the judiciary and the councils and the government and this sort of the legal fiction and all of this to keep us ensnared and trapped and think that the established ideas, which comes over in newspapers and the mainstream media and in videos and films and everything, that has telling us the message, continually just saying, no, when we expect to get old. But do we not all at some point in our lives think, I'm going to live forever? Do you never, when you were younger and you think, I'm never think about getting old and never think about, and is that not a kernel of what perhaps we ought to be thinking, that we have a much greater lifespan, and perhaps after 200 years you'll have had quite enough. Now, a lot of people would say, well, I've had enough after 50 years. And I know that many of my friends expressed to me when they reached their 40s, they would talk about themselves as being old, which I used to think, well, that's just nonsense. We're just beginning. And they say life begins after 40, don't they? Now they're saying life begins after 60. And I think that's true. And maybe there is an element of truth in that. But I'd be interested in what you think in the comments. Should we carry on and live a little bit longer than we do? Is there a transition at a certain age as we get wisdom, and yet somehow we are sabotaging ourselves because of the overall narrative that, yep, that's it, life is just that short? Be interested in your thoughts. Something to contemplate perhaps as you go about your day. Thank you for watching. I will talk to you all soon. Until the next one, bye for now.